So what's good, baby? How you doing?
Man, it's a good day, man. Of course, I had the ride yesterday,
Yep.
a 3 hour ride,
Tell me about it. How'd it
which was
go?
awesome. It was great. I tried out a new place. There's this, I'm in Nashville, so there's Percy Warner Park, and I run there a lot. But I just found out there's mountain biking trails, and so I went up there and hit them up, and there was some really awesome places to go. I hooked up with one guy who showed me a couple other places within the park, and so just kind of tooled around. And um, about probably like 2.5 hours in, I was definitely starting to feel kind of fatigued, and I didn't wear my glasses because they just fall off when I'm riding.
Yep.
And so it's kind of getting dark, and it's kind of getting sketchy. And so I decided to throw, because I was doing this, like, you go up and you get to the downhills and there's jumps and all this stuff. And of course I like to go big. So I'm hitting them up, and I got some good air. I like cleared a double, but it was kind of sketchy. And I was like, all right, we're 2.5 hours in, we're getting a little tired. It's dark. And so I headed back to like some easier terrain to finish out the ride, but it was intense, man.
Nice.
And then today's run was great as well. It was pouring down rain, but nice part about that is there's nobody on the trails. So
Yeah.
kind of had the whole park to myself there.
Awesome. Cool. Body
Yeah.
holding up okay?
Yeah, everything's good. Today with, practicing kind of running on the lower calories or almost no calories, it was interesting. My heart rate seemed to spike a little bit, and definitely still getting tired, but it was funny because, in my head I was thinking, oh man, I'm tired, like this is walking time. But all I did is just lean forward and pick up my knees, and you're running again. So it's really
Nice.
just, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's just in my head. Like, of course the body wants to rest,
Yeah.
in a slugfest like that. But yeah, so it was a totally different mindset of training, where usually I'm got my tailwind, got my snacks, I'm like cranking along. But so to have that idea of like coming off a hard ride yesterday, going straight into this, and but it was good. It was
Nice,
a great,
man.
great day.
Cool. You're killing it, dude. Yesterday
Thank
and
you.
today was your kind of your long ones, right? That was your days off of
Yeah.
work. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, you're right on track. Well, for anybody
Yeah.
listening, this is my man Collin, and introduce yourself, my man. Tell everybody what you're doing this year, and let us know what's up.
Yeah. So my name's Collin Morris. That's my Instagram handle too. It's just at Collin Morris. And basically, I hooked up with Adam, fellow athletic brewing ambassador,
Yeah.
and we kind of came across each other on Facebook. And I was really just kind of getting back into running and kind of challenging myself to some pretty big goals. And I'd run a half marathon, run a trail marathon, ran my first ultra, and kind of just was trying to look for the biggest possible challenge I could find. And so I decided to sign up for Leadville and run it for Autism Speaks and raise $5,000 for them. And I knew I was going to be in for one, because I literally was just almost like did the David Goggins thing. Like, I mean, I knew Badwater was not, I was not Badwater yet, but
Right.
he just kind of Googled like toughest races in the US. And I just kind of fell in love with the culture of Leadville and how it all came to be. And so I was like, boom, let's put it on the map if we can make it happen. And then of course we met, and I found out you crew and coach. And so one thing came to another, and now you're my coach, and you're going to be crewing me at the race. And
Yeah.
so we're at week 11 right now of just grinding out some really good training. And so got about probably another 20 weeks or so before the race.
Okay. You got it, man. You're right on track. I can't wait for it, man. I was a little nervous at first because you're like, I just started running 6 months ago and I signed up for the Leadville 100. And I'm like, whoa, okay, that's a tall order. So like, what inspired this? Like, was there like one particular thing that just fired you up and you're like, okay, I want a huge challenge.
Yeah. So
Uh-oh.
it didn't really set in how big of things were happening both in my family life, and at work. I mean, it was like throwing out the playbook on both fronts. And so I was just feeling this huge weight, to perform and to make things happen. And when I really couldn't, there was a lot that was out of my control. We moved out to Nashville from California 3 years ago. And so, we're kind of out here on our own, my wife, and then we have 3 kids. We've got 2, 4, and 6-year-old. And, but yeah, to be quite honest, I have struggled with addiction in the past, and I started drinking bourbon just a little bit here and there because I really like the flavor. And, there's a lot of people around here who enjoy, some good bourbon. And so, but pretty soon I legitimately realized I was knocking back like 2, 3, 4, like a night, like Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. And I was just going, all right, something's not really working here. This isn't going to work. And I was never an alcoholic. I struggle with drug addiction, but not alcohol as much. And I just noticed it kind of making everything a little more challenging. And so I was literally smoking a cigar in the back of my house, listening to Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I found out him through actually Andrew Huberman, who's a neuroscientist. They talked about studying David and how just, insane his ability to gut through stuff is. And so found both of those podcasts and was like, got to read this book. And so I read the book and I was just going, man, a lot of this rings true, and a lot more on the mental side than the physical side. Mm-hmm. But I was sitting there going, man, well, I can run a mile. Like, let's do this. Like, what do I have to lose? Because it seemed like everything was kind of out of my control. Work, at home, I was trying to make stuff happen and I couldn't. And so I just literally laced up what were 10-year-old shoes, because I was like, I'm not just going to go spoil myself with a pair of shoes. So I lace up the sneakers that are in the closet. I go run a mile, and I was just like, all right, well, let's do it again tomorrow. And so pretty soon those just started to build, and I was so inspired by Can't Hurt Me, then got into just more running, and people were like, Collin, I think you might have found your stride, like no pun intended, but people were saying like, you're doing really well at this running stuff. Most people don't just jump in and in 3 weeks run a half marathon and finish in under 2 hours, which, I mean, that's not like, that's not elite or anything, but for being a beginner runner and not having any real knowledge or training, that was pretty good. So I kind of just kept rolling with things. And and that's when I found Western States and Leadville, and kind of just the whole ultra running world, and through David Goggins as well. And just hearing these stories of people running these great distances, to me was something that was impossible. And so while I was looking at my life and kind of my surroundings going, man, I don't know how I'm going to get through this year and all of this stuff, I looked at these guys and I was like, well, I definitely couldn't do that. That's crazy. But as I started to build these little runs and put them together, I realized it actually kind of goes into one of my mental health diagnoses, bipolar disorder. I thought, well, I'd never be able to run a 100-miler because you have to go overnight. And I don't know that I could sacrifice sleep, because that can do a couple of things. It's definitely not, it's not good to sleep deprive yourself with a mental health diagnosis like that. Okay. And as I began to build kind of one like healthy building block onto another, these possibilities just started becoming a much bigger reality. And so did my first trail marathon, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it proved to me so much that you can literally just put one foot in front of the other. And that's what I had to do. I mean, nothing of that. The plan was not good on that. Like, it did not go well, but I finished the race and I felt the best I'd ever felt about almost anything, aside from my wedding day. That, okay, it doesn't compare to that. That was the best day for the record. And then so I thought, well, let's do this. If I can make this thing possible, let's do a 100-miler. And what's the hardest one I could possibly get into? I didn't even know what ultra sign up was. So I didn't even know of any other 100-milers. I just knew that there was Leadville, Western States, Moab 240. And so I was kind of like, well, which one can I feasibly get into? And Leadville was the one. So
wow.
Long story short, but that's where we're at.
That's inspirational, man. Yeah. Do you find that running helps your mental health? Does it help with your bipolar disorder? Does it help you to stay focused? Does it help you to stay in a better place on the day to day?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the most important things, and I've heard this for years, but it never really caught up with me, and I never really put it to use, was how important physical exercise is for for health in general.
Yep.
Just the everyday person, we should all be healthy, but even more so for somebody with a mental health diagnosis or anyone who's not neurotypical, working through mental challenges. And so for me, there was this just floodgate of stuff that I couldn't handle and couldn't control. And, my diagnosis goes back over 15 years ago. And so I've been managing it in a very healthy way for a long time, with counseling and therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy
Yep.
Is a big one. And so it's kind of like mentally I had most of that dialed in, but the chink in my armor was when I could no longer control some certain aspects of my life. I began to feel more and more defeated, more and more like I was going backward in life, lower on the totem pole, like not like, but lower on I've come so far in my career and in my family, and now I'm just backpedaling and I'm on a treadmill that I'm just falling off of. I can't get ahead of myself. And so as I picked up running and I became more active, I just kind of punched all of basically the negativity and the things that I was telling myself in the teeth, and they start to go away. And so I think the biggest thing is just helping me filter through, like when you get out there for past like an hour, once you're out there for 2 hours, the things that whatever your mood is, whatever that current day held, it just starts to drip away. I know that's very common for a lot of people. And yeah, I like the phrase that running is therapeutic, but it's not therapy. The types of things that I deal with and that are actual mental health diagnoses, you need actual counseling and things like that. But being able to get out there, get my heart pumping, you get back, and all of a sudden, if you're having a crappy day, there's this new level of confidence that you didn't have before you went on the run. Mm-hmm. And then pretty soon you're looking at your watch and it's giving you these notifications and you're going, wow, I literally had no idea that I could do this. And it just keeps building and building. So no matter what else is going on, whether it's the pandemic or things at home, all of these things that I can't control, I'm able to control my movement. And when I do something like that gives accomplishment, it was a complete game changer.
Nice. That's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, is because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I wanted to talk to you about your bipolar disorder and just how that's affected your life. And I appreciate you coming on and being open and candid about it all. You said you'd be willing to talk about it, and you're more willing to talk about your mental health issues than I have been in the past. Like, I've talked about pretty much everything on this podcast except my own mental health. So, but you said your diagnosis was like 15 years ago. So how old were you at that time?
So I would have been, well, now my math is going to come into check here. Let's see. So it was probably 2007, which would have made me 23.
Okay.
So I'm 30. Well, I was 23. Yeah. So it's about 15 years ago.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's when it was.
So what did things look like before you were 23? Like, what was life like? What was happening, and what made you want to go to a doctor and get this diagnosis, or dig deeper into your head and figure out what's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, long story short, I had a pretty stable childhood, both parents in the home, but my parents split up when I turned 18, and I was getting high at the time, and kind of just wanted to check out because, everything that I was my foundation was gone, and I just didn't know what to do. So I got high with my friends and kind of checked out. Mm-hmm. And that worked for, well, when I say worked, I mean, it didn't have any glaringly obvious issues, probably for a couple of years. So when I turned from 18 to 21, I stayed in my hometown. I'm from Napa, California. And I just stayed there, and I was just in a fog because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I took some college classes. I was working in restaurants, and I was making decent money. So on the surface, everything was just kind of moving along. And then there was this girl that I ran into that I really liked. She was going down to Southern California to go to school. I went as well, but like went to a different, I moved into a different place. I was going to a different school. So we just kind of went down there together. That flopped. So I was stuck in LA by myself, but played music. And so I kind of stayed down there. So I gave myself a year down there. Even though it was really hard, I challenged myself to stay down there and figure stuff out. And then I came back up, actually a year to the day. I came up and moved to San Francisco because I had a buddy there. Okay. And I was still getting high. I was still working in this crazy high stress restaurant. And I began to notice kind of like anxiety, just this, not like, oh, I'm not feeling well, like actual panic attacks, heavy breathing, kind of almost like not really, kind of going, wait, something's wrong, but you can't really put your finger on it. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of took note of that, and I started talking to people about it and just saying, hey, I don't know what's going on. Like, do you know what might be going on? Because back then there was no conversations about anxiety or mental health. It was something that people, at least in my circles, just didn't really talk about. Mm-hmm. So essentially what happened is some really interesting things happened, like lined up in the place that I was living, and I wasn't taking care of my body very well at all. I wasn't eating enough. I wasn't drinking enough water, and I was getting high. And effectively what happened is I got really paranoid that something like bad was going to happen in my apartment based on some things that I was seeing. I was kind of like, oh, this is sketchy. But it got to the point where, essentially I had what's known as a manic episode. So whatever was happening around me, to me, was heightened. Yeah. Things were like a lot worse in my mind than they actually were. And so I made my way to my mom's house, which was across the bay. So Concord, I was in San Francisco. So I made my way across because I was like, this isn't working at this house where I was staying, and I needed to get away. But that's when I kind of had a breaking point of just some really strange things that actually are well documented. So I had no idea at the time what was going on, but I took all my belongings with me because I thought I was moving out, but I just looked really strange on the bus, and I didn't have any food or water. And like I said, I was hungry. So I was like asking people, hey, do you have any snacks? Or like, this is a communal thing, right? We're just on the bus here in San Francisco. Everybody's cool, but that's not real typical behavior, So between that and then I got on the bus, or not the bus, I got on what they call BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit. So it's a train that goes under the bay. And I had this feeling of like, dang, I don't think I'm going to make it. Like this isn't good. I'm not feeling well. And so I was kind of talking myself through this. And the next thing I know, there was an officer tapping me on the shoulder saying, hey, are you doing okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. What's up? He said, well, we got, somebody told us that you were talking to yourself. And I was like, oh, I'm totally cool, man. Like, I'm not going to cause any harm. He's like, well, why don't you step off with me? And so we got off and called my mom, who's at the next stop. And he actually let me get back on the train, and we rode it together to the next stop where my mom picked me up. And so I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And I had worked with a therapist in the past, but nothing had ever really turned up. So as far as like signs or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So I called my therapist, just said, hey, this is what happened, not really feeling super great. And he just said, hey, if unless you're feeling like you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, it was probably Saturday. He said, let's talk on Monday. And he said, if that does happen, just go to the ER. No big deal. But if you do feel like you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, go to the ER. I thought, okay, that's easy. I can do that. And it did get kind of weird. I kind of felt like I was, wanting to hurt somebody, and that was like really weird. And so I just said, hey, Mom, let's go, because Tim said if I'm starting to feel like this, go ahead and go in. Yeah. And she was like, cool. So we just drove over. They did a drug test and kind of an eval, and everything was fine. There was nothing in my system but weed. And so, it wasn't anything too out of the ordinary. They didn't keep me there because there was nothing too weird going on. but they did refer me to a psychiatrist. So once I started detailing through the story, the psychiatrist basically was able to say, okay, based on these factors, you had what's known as a manic disorder, indicative of bipolar 2 disorder, which generally will manifest in someone's like younger, like early 20s with a manic episode. And then it usually is treatable, and then it will surface later in life, more like in depression. So it's not that like up and down, crazy in and out cycles. Like from every hour you see somebody who's like ecstatic, and then the next they're really down. It's much slower rolls than that.
Okay.
So it's very treatable, but you have to be super intentional about making sure you stay healthy. And so oddly enough, like fast forwarding, it seems like it was surfacing in the form of depression in this past year. And that's kind of funny. It's kind of like full circle. I received the front end of that, and now I kind of started to receive the back end of what they said, because now I'm in my mid-30s, which they said it would surface more in depression. And so now that I've attacked that with not just, counseling, my wife and I do marriage counseling, but also with this exercise, it just has leveled things out quite a bit. So I know it's a long story, but
no, I'm interested, man. It's interesting to me. I mean, you seem, you are very well adjusted and well spoken. And so that's why I'm interested in it, because bipolar disorder has some stigmas attached to it. And I'm just trying to figure it all out for myself. And I want listeners to figure it out too. And I want some light to be shown on this. So, I'm interested. What was it like when you got the diagnosis? Was it like a breath of fresh air, or were you just totally freaked out, or what was that like?
Yeah, so I was freaked out because I knew one person that was bipolar, and I still remember the first time that person told me that. I thought, like, I literally was like, oh, like weirdo. I was like, what is that even? Like, I don't even want to be around that, So that was my own view because of my ignorance. I didn't know what it was. And so I just thought it was like, oh, I kind of want to stay away from that. And so it was really kind of like a gut check, because when I got the diagnosis, I still remember leaving that office, driving away in the car, and kind of going, well, what does this mean for me now? Am I on like, can I still do the things that I wanted to do with my life, or am I now limited by what I can go and do? And dating a little bit further back, that wasn't my first. I don't think ADD is technically a mental health disorder, but it is indicative of your brain responding and reacting and acting differently than somebody without those characteristics. So between ADD and then the other thing that I deal with is called central auditory processing disorder. So it's kind of like dyslexia, but for sound. So for instance, if someone gives you an instruction, it could go in one ear and just disappear before it even gets to like the part of your brain that you can decipher the information. Okay. So I'd already had those two diagnoses. So it felt like that, but it was kind of like third time's a charm, because the first one was like ADD. Okay. High school grades aren't real good. That's fine. It makes sense. Go to college, central auditory processing disorder. Okay. So I just hear things a little differently than other people. And I just have to, reading comprehension is not that great. So I have to do, take extra notes and qualify for a note taker and things like that. So it was no big deal. But getting that third one was like, wow, this is the big leagues. Like, what do I do now? Because you don't leave the office and they say, no, this is a real, treatable thing. You're going to be good. Here's what we do. You just up. Like, here's your prescription, and on down the road you go. It's literally like, okay, well, let's try and figure this out. So it was a lot of testing of like medications to see if they worked. And that was really, really hard. So I distinctly remember telling my mom, I said, I'm sick of me. Like, it was this moment of just when I was going through all these medications, trying to get my life right. I'm sitting there with my mom in her car. I feel like I'm being toted around like a kid again, who's sick. And I just was like, I'm sick of this. Like, I'm sick of me. And so it was this hugely dark moment of feeling like kind of like hopeless, you know. And she was extremely encouraging and super loving, and I'm, you know, wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for her support and everything like that. But it was a big like pill to swallow to realize, okay, my life's going to be different than I had envisioned it before. Yeah.
When did you get married?
So I got married. It would have been, we just hit our 8th anniversary.
Okay.
So
nice. Congrats.
April 13th. Yeah, April 13th of 2013. So we've been married 8 years now.
And how did your diagnosis affect like your marriage when you guys were dating?
Yeah.
Did you have to kind of come out and tell her what's going on, and what does that look like?
So it's a totally it's a God thing. It was a super unique situation. When that stuff happened, I started going to church again, and so I met a lot of really great people. But was really kind of worried. I didn't want to step into any like relationships or try and pursue any girls because I was just trying to get my mind right.
Yeah.
And but I met, you know, this girl that I thought was really cool, and her name's Anna. And so we would just have these conversations, and like I was fresh off this thing happening, and so I was just telling people like, this is where I'm at. I had, you know, this just happened. Here's where I'm headed. And what I want to do and where I want to go. But I don't really know what else that looks like. It's a day-to-day journey. And so it was really a welcoming like environment. And one of the people that was in that crew, Anna, is now my wife. And so it was kind of like known very early on, by way of just me being kind of an open person and just kind of making it made me feel more comfortable, people just knowing who I am off the bat.
Yeah.
And not having to like, you know, kind of try and hide it, you know, like in an interview process, it's just kind of like, hey, this is what's up with me. This is where I am. And people are generally extremely like caring and curious. Well, like, how did that happen? You know, and what does that mean now? What does that, you know, mean next? And so it's kind of like a support group in a way. And so as we started dating, it really didn't affect much of anything, because at that point I'd probably had two or 3 years of it being behind me. And so I'd begun to manage it pretty well. I'd gotten on medication that was, you know, working really well for me. And I'd been through the ones that weren't working well. I got to that point where I said, you know, you get to this weird place where, and it happens all the time, it's actually really sad in some cases, but kind of like, no, I think I'm better. You know, I think like I'm good to go now.
I don't need this medication.
And I did that. And it was going down that road, and to where I just caught it, and I was like, oh, yep. I was like, I'm doing that thing that people say, oh, I'm better now. And so I kind of caught it before it got worse again. But it was a pretty quick turnaround between like feeling like I was better, and then realizing, oh, I need to continue this work that I'm doing to like keep my life on track. And so I had already gone through that kind of that cycle. And then when I was coming back into like rebuilding my life, I think I kind of had just some of the wherewithal to realize like, I'm not ready to be in a relationship right now. And so that was that period where I was getting pretty chill and things were leveling out, and getting to know some really great people at the same time. So,
yeah. You mentioned that you were drinking too. Was that prior to all this? And and also the next question is, was that like a form of self-medication that you think you're doing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the self-medicating aspect was very much so with the marijuana. And I've seen it across the spectrum, from people that aren't affected by it at all. They smoke and they don't even notice any difference, all the way to like, you know, debilitating laziness and everywhere in between. And so I was kind of in that in between where it was giving me some relief, but alcohol never really, my friends all drank like they could put back 40s just like one after another, and that wasn't me. So I never really got into drinking, but that was kind of the interesting thing about getting back into bourbon. So even though that was so recent and I've had, you know, such sobriety, I mean, I used to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. I used to smoke, you know, an ounce or so a week, like, which isn't maybe a ton in today's terms, but for, you know, that's enough to make things a little challenging. So yeah, that was definitely a self-medicating aspect. But yeah, I didn't really get into bourbon until I got out here.
Okay.
And that was actually a pretty interesting thing, because that goes to kind of like what David Goggins talks about in his book, Can't Hurt Me. He would basically do anything to get people to like him when he was in high school.
Yep.
And so he was just striving for that. And it wasn't until like a year or so in, and like, you know, this last year where I noticed that I was having more than just one or two, like every random once in a while. Pretty soon I have a cabinet where I'm collecting these different bourbons and drinking them, you know, daily. That I went, wow, I really kind of got into this to like on the guise of building community, or, you know, becoming friends with new people, which I did, but I did that at the expense of my own health, because ultimately I kind of like let the crack in the door back open to, you know, potentially being unhealthy again, you know, because I think there are just seasons, especially for everyone, but I mean, you're never going to be perfectly fine, or you know, in a complete shamble. Like, you're going to be somewhere in the middle, kind of floating back and forth. But yeah, I kind of noticed that self-medicating aspect coming back, and I literally just said, this ain't working, and I got rid of all of it. I just cleared the cabinet out. My wife was like blown away, because some of them were like $150, $200 bottles.
Right.
And you know, I probably had 15 bottles or whatever. I just made the decision, because I just saw that same thing happening. I was like, no, this isn't going to happen. So
that's good that you had that wherewithal, because, you know, other people go down some pretty nasty paths with the whole self-medicating thing. Yeah, it's incredible. It's a crazy journey, man. How does this affect you, like, on the day-to-day right now?
Yeah. So I would say that at this point, having gotten through, you know, that time, I would say, you know, it's probably like February of 2020 up until maybe probably leading close to December. So that being a block of time that was extremely challenging for me. Now, I would say I don't have any adverse effects or like mood swings or anything like that, but I'll just notice that on some days I'm a lot more tired than others. And kind of my barometer is for, like, for instance, depression is if I can't get out of bed. You know, sometimes that can be indicative of a couple of things, but there's been days on the weekend where I don't feel like getting out of bed. Now, for a while, I was working 6 days a week and, you know, probably overextending myself, but it essentially comes down to self-care. So if I'm taking care of myself, getting exercise, sleeping, you know, I sleep between 8 and 9 hours a night. That seems to be my sweet spot. But if I get that sleep and I'm eating well and I'm hydrating and I'm kind of checking myself on emotion and what might be happening, then I pretty much stay in the clear. But when generally, if I let things get to me or I'm not sleeping enough, it can ramp up pretty quick to just irritability. And so that's the whole thing with bipolar disorder, is you're just managing your symptoms, but it's also can be a pretty difficult thing, because when you get sick or you get the flu, you know, you're sick for a couple of days or a week and you get tissues and home remedies. But with bipolar disorder, it's for life. And so it is a 24/7 job to make sure that you're taking really good care of yourself, just to be at a baseline. So it can be a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it sounds like it. And so if I understand you correctly, you said you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder 2.
Yeah.
And so that's not the super manic high ups, low downs throughout the day. It's more of a little bit more level, but it manifests itself in depression and anxiety from time to time. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I'm not a mental health professional, but in my own studies and understanding, essentially, bipolar 1 is what people are most familiar with. And generally, you'll have manic episodes that could last like 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, somebody could be on cloud 9, where they've just come up with the newest, greatest idea to make money, or, they've realized that they only need to sleep 2 hours a day because they can get so much work done,
Right.
if they're not sleeping. Right. And so this is something you're seeing for like 2 weeks. These are these big episodes, and generally will finish with hospitalization. So somebody, either a loved one, is like, hey, we need to take you in, or they realize like this light bulb moment, oh, something's wrong, and they go in, and then get help and receive treatment. And then on the adverse side, also depression. So you could have a 2-week period where somebody can't get out of bed. They have no hope. They have, no matter the circumstances, right? You feel as though your life's over or something to that nature. And so that's kind of like that's the main bipolar 1 traits and characteristics. Then with bipolar 2, they have what's called hypomania. And so essentially when I said a manic episode, that was technically hypomania, because they call it hypo because it's a hyper version of a manic episode. So it's shorter, it peaks really quickly, and then it usually dies off. And that's generally the only main episode that a person with bipolar disorder 2 will experience, is that major manic episode. They get the diagnosis, and then it's just a matter of managing symptoms with that potential for a dip later in life. So.
Okay. And are you managing this with like antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication, or what exactly is the medication you're taking?
Yeah, so I take 2 medications. I take Zoloft and Lamictal. Zoloft is an antidepressant. It's a very low dose. So that's kind of just to keep things from going too far down.
Yep.
And then the Lamictal is actually what's known as a mood stabilizer. And so it kind of just keeps a floor and a ceiling on your mood.
Okay.
And that can sound very like difficult to understand, because I remember when it was first told to me, I was like, wait a minute, you're going to take away my personality. Like, what do you mean you're going to put a floor and a ceiling on? And honestly, some of the medications I took did make me feel really numb. So, that's actually, I just want to say, for maybe anybody that's listening, that's part of it. And as long as you do it with a doctor and with supportive loved ones, like, if you can make it through that stage, you can get to a place where you do feel normal. You don't feel like you sacrificed any of your, because I'm generally like a really uppity guy, and I like to have a lot of fun and cut up and joke around. And so I was worried that I would lose that part of me. But those 2 medications just seem to be the cocktail that works with my body. And it's kind of like dieting. Some people eat meat, some people don't eat meat, some people do fruit, some people do only veggies. I mean, like, there's so many different ways to diet and to treat your body, and people just have to find what works for them. And so doing it, of course, I've never made medication changes without talking to my doctor and all of that, because frankly, it just scares me too much. I just don't want to mess with it. I'll take his, approach, and then I know what I can trust. Right. And, but yeah, that's what I take. And, it seemed to work well. I've been on the same doses for a long, long time.
Okay.
And it's not I'll say this too, it's not the kind of medication where you take it if you're having symptoms. So
Right.
sometimes with depression, you might take an antidepressant if, for instance, you notice like a episode coming on or something like that. And I haven't experimented with that. I wanted to get into a rhythm that was predictable. And so, and that's the kind of medication that I'm on. Because the other type isn't necessarily bad or anything like that. It's just it takes a little bit more behavior management, because you have to decide, oh, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to take one. And I don't want to go based on mood. I just have the same medicine every day. And then I manage those moods with, whatever might be happening.
Yeah. How long did that like sort of feeling out process take for you to try different medications and to finally find the right ones that work for you? Was that a long process?
So if I remember correctly, it was around a month. And the reason is they have what's called like a titration process. So for instance, one of the ones I'm on now has or a taper would be another term, but essentially you step up your dose. So you really, for 3 weeks, you don't really know if it's even going to work. So in those first couple of weeks, you're kind of going, is this thing working? I don't really know where we're at. And then you get to week 3 and then you're like, is this thing working? No, it doesn't feel good. Okay. Well, so then you got to titrate back down off of that one to try something different. And so not all of them are like that, but, so that's kind of what I think draws it out a little bit longer than just like trying an allergy pill and getting results within a couple of days.
For sure. So you got pretty lucky. You must have tried 1 or 2 medications before you found the ones that worked?
So, it was probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah, there was probably 3 or 4. Again, the 30-day period is kind of just a general. I'm almost like curious now, but I don't remember exactly how long it was.
Okay.
But I do know it's about 3 or 4, because I remember a good like week or 2 period of really feeling like, man, this doesn't feel great. I don't really know what to do from here. But then things started to level out. So it's probably closer to 2, I guess.
Okay. Do you have to be adamant about your sobriety in order to keep yourself mentally healthy? And do you worry about that, spiking or lowering your moods in the long term? Is that something that you're concerned with, or do you even consider yourself 100% sober, or where are you at with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to answer the question just directly first, yeah, keeping sobriety is huge, because it's just an additional, any upper or downer is a mood altering substance. And so slice it however you want. If you're using a substance that's altering your mood, well, then you can get into self-medicating, if your mood is down and you find that something makes you feel better, or if it's even a downer, but just having that in your system makes you feel numb, even though it's bringing you down. So it gets into that behavior that you have to manage. So, yeah. And I think at this point in my life, like I said, I realized that even though, because I would talk to my counselor, I would talk to my psychiatrist about it. Hey, I'm enjoying bourbon with friends. And he'd say, well, how's that going for you? And there was really no warning signs. He knew the medications I was on. I've become very adamant about asking lots of questions. So I would kind of like throw everything at him and say, all right, now you tell me, because if you see something I'm not seeing, let me know. And so it really wasn't even him that made any sort of mention. I was the one who pulled the plug on it. But I think at this point, that was really kind of the final straw of like dipping my toe in the water of saying, oh, I can have a drink, or, just socially with friends or whatever. Keeping sobriety is gotta be the most important thing that I think somebody with a mental health disorder can do to keep themselves in a healthy place.
Totally. Well, it probably affects the medication somehow too, don't you think?
It does. Yeah. And so that's actually a really good point. So I had a 2-drink maximum. For any time I was having a drink, I would not have any more than 2 drinks in a night. Like I said, once it became 2, the pores became a little taller. Now we're at 3. kind of feeling good and, no adverse effects really. But essentially the only real side effect that my medication had with it was the potential for dizziness. So it didn't manifest for me in that way. I would just get really tired. Okay. And so, but again, I don't want to exist in a tired, lethargic state, that. So I was justifying it at the time. I totally, can see in hindsight that for me, not that I want to demonize enjoying a beverage, but for me, that was something that was not the right choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it common for people with bipolar disorder to feel like they're getting better and I want to get off my medication now? It seems like I've heard about that happening a lot of times, and then bad things happening, whether it's someone being manic or even suicide. Like it seems like that happens. Is it like a common thing for someone with your mental health issues, just to get to that point where it's like, I think I'm better now. I think that I've solved this puzzle.
Yeah. I think it is a really common problem. I don't have a whole lot of insight into others' journeys, but we do see people that are usually leaning more toward an unhealthy place when they decide, like, even though they are feeling good or they feel like they've gotten to a place of full health, they're usually not making that decision with like counsel from their doctor. Because I've had my doctors ask, like, this isn't any sort of like weird brag or anything, but oftentimes if I had to switch doctors or I moved, they'd say, well, Collin, like, what do you need from us? Or like, at one point I had a doctor say, you're probably our highest functioning patient, like in our practice. And so I kind of just got used to that rhythm. So I could see it would be very easy to have that conversation of like, yeah, doc, well, like, what can we do to reduce things? And I've had doctors ask, like, do you feel good on the medicine? Do you want to reduce, or is there anything you want to change? Which there's nothing wrong with, if you're walking through that with your doctor. But I always felt that I'd gotten to a place of health on the medication that I was. And I had just enough of a touch of like going off of it after that first like 6 months or a year of being on medication. And so for me, there was never an attraction to think like, I want to rid myself of this. I even had, it's actually funny, I had a health, it was for life insurance. So my premiums are higher because of statistically, people with mental health seem to have shorter lifespans. It's just the way that it is. Doesn't matter if you're high functioning or not. Once you have the diagnosis, you're in. And he even asked, like, it was so weird too, because he was almost like, can't that be cured though? Almost kind of like, because I was trying to negotiate a lower rate. I was saying like, man, is there anything you can do? Like, I'm pretty darn healthy. And he was kind of saying like, yeah, the only thing really keeping you in the rate bracket you're in is that diagnosis. And he goes, but can't that like be removed? And I was like, man, I only wish, bud. Like, no, it can't. I think you can manage your symptoms. And again, I'm sure medicine is evolving so fast and we know so little about the brain. There may be ways to, remove the diagnosis. But for me, once you have that episode, that's kind of what set the trajectory for the rest of things. Yep. So for me and my journey, it's something that I will always kind of live at home base. And then that's not my identity, but that's always going to be kind of at home base. And I'm going to bounce things that are happening off of making sure that I'm doing the right things to stay healthy. Totally.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like if everything's going right in your life and, your relationships are good, family life is good, work is good. It's like, why would you try and alter that or change that in any way? If you're, And you mentioned that, you go to church and you're a man of faith as well. How does that play into this? I'm a man of faith as well. And so I'm just curious, like, what that looks like for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it can be tricky in a couple of ways because depending on who you're around, you could be in a culture of like, well, you shouldn't need medication. Like God can heal you,
Right,
you
right.
know. So, and I've seen some crazy miracles. Trust me when I say that I know a God that can do some miraculous things. Um, but to the degree that the social construct of decisions made around whether you should be on medication or not versus what kind of help you should get. I mean, in some circles, it's not even believed that you should share any of you shouldn't go for counsel. Like you should have everything you need to be able to counsel yourself, essentially.
Right.
So it can be a tricky landscape. I think I've been fortunate to be with people, both with pastors and friends and family that are kind of like of the format that I heard this story, and it's probably been shared a million times in a million different ways, but there's a dude drowning in the ocean, right? And he's, waving, somebody help me, help me, help me. And, a boat comes by and he's like, hey, jump in, man. I'll save you. And the guy's like, no, it's fine. God's going to save me. He's like, all right, man, paddles on. Another boat comes, same thing. Third time, a helicopter literally flies over and is like, hey, grab this rope. He's like, no, God's going to save me. Well, the guy drowned, gets up to heaven, and he's like, God, why didn't you save me? And he's like, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter, right? And so the way that I had that described to me is like, that could in your situation be the prescriptions you're on. So yeah, I might not have a miraculous healing of all of my symptoms or things like that, or my diagnosis removed, but there are options that are totally, in my opinion, and in most of the medical health fields, studies, doable, treatable, healthy for you, and not don't have crazy adverse consequences.
Right.
There are small side effects, but for the most part, I've been in circles where that's been encouraged, because I know where my faith lies, and I know what I believe, but that doesn't mean that I don't make different decisions. Like, well, I might eat something differently, or I might ingest something like a medicine or a pill or things to make my life here on earth better, because there's not going to be perfection here. We're in a place where we're in a flawed world.
Totally. Yes, we are. So I'm trying to get a kind of a broad scope of this, and this might be a little bit more of a personal question. I'm trying to understand, like, basically like your marriage and how how this works in your marriage. Like, has your wife seen you like in some sort of a manic episode or really depressed, or like I said, this is kind of personal and I don't know if I'm wording this right, but like, what's the worst your wife has ever seen?
No, that's a good question. Like, Anna, you want to come in here? No.
Right. I'm sure she might have some stories for us, right?
Yeah. No,
I know my girl has a lot of stories about me.
Yeah. No, she'd be like, no, he's great. Everything's fine. He's not bad. No.
Well, like we said, you're high functioning. So I'm sure that most of the time everything is good, but I'm sure that everything's not perfect.
Right. So I will say that I know it can be challenging to be married to me, to be close to me, because there will just be head scratcher moments where I might be in a mood or tired or not communicate the best. And that can make it really challenging for Anna as my partner to kind of say, like, well, I want to have grace on you because I know you might not be having the best day, but also like that kind of hurt, or that was kind of messed up what happened. Or just can't understand maybe why I'm doing or saying something that could seemingly be insignificant, but we know communication is so tricky. So from body language to tone of voice. And then, so I think the biggest place I've noticed it is when I am either tired or, in this past year, I think there have been times where I just hit the couch at the end of the day. And I don't even mutter as much words as like, hey, how's it going? Or hey, how was your day? I'm just so flattened because I gave everything I had at work. And here's what's funny is because we all have these days. These are just normal things. I'm normal just like everybody else in the sense that I go through ups and downs at work and things like that. But there can be really challenging times where, for instance, she's thinking like, man, I wish you'd, help me out with the kids. And I'm just going, I can't even get up. Right. Like I have nothing inside me that's going to bring me up to a place where I can read a bedtime story or whatever. And so that can be really challenging for her because on one hand, she wants to have grace and say, like, I understand that he's not necessarily in control of his energy levels. But then there's the other human side of it, the human element of like, I don't really care. Like, can't you just get up and help me anyway? Like I get that you're tired. Right. And so really what I've noticed is that it can be a delicate balance of having grace and empathy. But it requires, I would say, a hefty level of communication. I try and do it on the front end of saying where I'm at in any given moment or time, because that's kind of like me setting the stage for maybe how I'm doing that day. For her, that might be an emotional overload just for start, like, whoa, because I can dial those things in and say, I know what's going on today, here's where I'm at. And for her, it can be, well, that's inconvenient because I really needed your help tonight, like, yep. But since she takes care of our kids and she also, takes really good care of me, with just as a good husband or good wife does, does things for their spouse. But it can definitely make it challenging when I would say like a mildly depressive episode hits and she's tired too. So it kind of just adds a little bit. But on days that I'm then feeling better, I do what I can with my energy to kind of pay it back. If I've got the extra energy to do something, and it can be a slippery slope because it's not like she expects it or I owe her something, but it can be the thing of like, like I'm running these races now. Like I know how much more I have left in the tank. So if I'm feeling down and she's taking care of a lot of stuff, but the next week my energy starts to come back and I can just knock out some stuff that I know would really take it off her plate. We've gotten into this ebb and flow of, I guess, just being gracious on each other. And I hope if this sounds like we've got it all figured out, we don't by any means. We are so far from perfect. It's a learning experience every day. I mentioned we're in marriage counseling. Like we've been probably for about 9-10 months now. We've been, meeting with our counselor weekly over the phone and just dialing these things in. I mean, it's almost like a race strategy or you're like pacing, like you have to figure out what needs to be true for this to happen and this to happen. And you have that plan and you set it up, but when things don't go that way, it's like, well, what are we going to do now to reformulate? And so
totally.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. It sounds like, you've had enough time under your belt where you've kind of got this figured out, like we mentioned before, you're high functioning and yeah, there's been a period of adjustment where you've sort of got it dialed in to a certain degree. And that totally answers my question. At those times when like you come home from work and you're just dead and you can't hardly even say anything and you just drop down on the couch, is that like a depression for you? Or so like depression for me isn't debilitating or anything like that, but I've definitely experienced it off and on. And it's usually like, yeah, really exhausted and irritable. And in the moment, I can't identify it as, oh, I'm depressed right now. I'm just like tired and just in a mood, but then like 3-4 days later, when I've gotten back to normal, I look back and I say, oh, I was definitely depressed. Like that was depression. Is that how it is for you?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Okay.
and it's funny, that 3 to 4 day mark is pretty similar because you can kind of gut it out for 3 or 4 days, but it's that third and fourth day that you come home and you're flattened that you start to realize something's off.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I've ever come home and said, "Hey babe, I'm depressed today. That's why I'm going to lay down."
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Yeah. Me neither.
Yeah. It's funny like that. So it really just, and that's why it's that almost like daily inventory, like systems check. All right, what do we got going on? How are we feeling? And usually when things are busy and you're just moving right along is when that creeps in and you miss it. And then pretty soon you'll like start to catch a comment that you make and go, "Oh, it's kind of out of character for me," or whatever the case is, or you miss the alarm clock a few too many times, and the things start to kind of just pile. It's almost like an injury that's like swelling. And then you kind of come back and go, "Oh, okay, that wasn't an intentional choice on my part. That was something that I was doing my best to work through, and I may not have done the best." Actually, that can be kind of crazy too, because then you feel bad. Like you can almost feel like sort of guilty for having been depressed because you see what it does to your partner when you're not at your best. And so that kind of brings in a whole nother element. You really have to learn to be self-accepting of what's going on with yourself. Otherwise, it can be a trap of just feeling bad about the fact that you're feeling bad.
Totally. Yep. So it helps if we have understanding partners too, which it sounds like we both do.
Right.
Yeah. Do you worry about like passing this on genetically to your kids? Is that a concern for you, or is that something you talk over with doctors, or is that something you don't even think about?
So early on, so before I had kids, there was something about having to take medicine every day. And I thought, man, someday I'm going to have to explain to my kids, like, yeah, daddy takes medicine every day because he needs it, or whatever the case was. So I kind of had this, I dreamed this idea up that, you know, things were going to be difficult. And of course now having kids, like they don't care. They love you so much.
Right.
Like the fact that you could do nothing when they're under 5, it's like a dog, you know, that you just come in the door and they're like excited to see you just by the fact that you're there. So I wouldn't have expected that, you know, prior to having kids. But what we know is that there is some genetic elements that are traceable with bipolar disorder. There are also lots of studies that show, like, essentially like what happened to me. I had many outside factors, so contributing. All these little pieces kind of had to line up for me to just kind of go, bing, like have just like kind of break. It was like a fuse broke in my brain. So the way I've distilled it down in my head with my kids is, the thing that works for me is both my parents loved me deeply and unconditionally, no short of their challenges, you know, and some other things that did happen to me in my childhood that were pretty rough. But I knew that I could count on them, even if stuff was really crappy. And so I've just resolved to the fact that I'm going to do the best I can to be there for them, be present, and show them unconditional love as much as possible. So like my 6-year-old, Ayla, she feels everything. You know, she's a lot like me, heart on her sleeve, you know, and she feels everything very, very deeply. I mean, it's unbelievable, like the amount of empathy and understanding she has. And it's also very, very challenging. You know, she feels things so deeply, it can sometimes be hard to get her to, you know, do something as simple as like, hey, you know, it's time to go brush your teeth. And that's just kids in general. And so kind of the way I've distilled it down is, I can't control what is in them already, you know, what may be genetic, but I can make an environment to the best of my ability that is stable, so that if they aren't feeling stable, they're not worried where they're going to go to find stability. they know that they can have it, you know, in my arms. Like that's, and to what degree that they want to use that or need that, that is going to be up to them. Mm-hmm. But I've just kind of had to resolve to the idea that I can only do what I can do, and and make it an open topic, you know, something that is okay to talk about. It's okay to talk about our feelings. Like, oh, you wanted to punch that kid in school today? Those are some big feelings. Like, tell me more about that. Mm-hmm. Was there something that happened, or were you just feeling angry? Like, you know, and so trying to encourage that, because I didn't get a lot of that growing up. So I really bottled stuff in. I didn't talk about anything, despite how open I am now. This is me now. This is the Collin 2.0. Right. I used to be very closed away and didn't talk about much at all. So I want that to be an environment that they know that they can trust here, and then hopefully they'll bring elsewhere as well. You know, that they will then show empathy to others that are maybe in similar situations, because it just diffuses stuff. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I view the mental health with kids, or my kids in specific.
For sure. And do you still attend counseling? You still have like a psychiatrist?
So I do. I only have to see him. I only go to him, my psychiatrist, because for people who don't know, therapy, therapists can't prescribe medicines. They can only essentially walk through conversation and counsel and, you know, behavior with you. And then a psychiatrist is able to actually prescribe medication for symptoms of an issue you're having. And so I only see my psychiatrist once every 3 months, unless I feel like I want to talk to him more. I've had times where they said, well, you know, we'll see you in 6 months, or give me a call if you need anything in the meantime. And that's just more just to check in to make sure everything's good before they prescribe my next, because I usually get my medications every 90 days. Yep. But generally, if we weren't doing marriage counseling, I'd be talking to my therapist, you know, more often.
Okay.
But generally, we'll chat through things that affect both Anna and I mutually. And it's also just a place I can spill everything out that I don't tell anyone else. And totally. We can talk through it if need be. So.
Yeah. Did you grow up like I grew up, just like thinking that like therapy is for pussies and like, you know, I grew up on like, you know, the Rambo movies and the Rocky movies, and, you know, we don't talk about our feelings. We don't go to therapy. We just figure it out, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, what's funny, here was my picture of a therapist. Do you remember, I don't know if you remember in the movie, The Santa Claus, but there was the guy, there was the guy that was married to the girl, right? So there's the whole family, but then the husband is like this nerdy therapist, and he's always getting made fun of for his sweaters. And he's always like, how does that make you feel? Right? Like, he's just the picturesque, and it was in the 90s. And I was like, yeah. I was like, therapists are idiots. Like, right. They charge people to talk. Yeah. So I had this idea that, you didn't talk about that stuff. Like, just figure it out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's definitely, I think we grew up similarly there.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't really realized until the last few years how much, just talking it out with, you know, whether it's a therapist, or for me, it's a recovery sponsor, or just friends, just calling up friends that I haven't talked to in 8-10 years, and just being, you know, to get out of my head. Sometimes I have to ask other people what's going on in their life. How are you doing, man? Tell me your problems, you know? And it's almost like I start trying to help them through their stuff, and that helps me to get out of my head. So it's like, just talking to people, just like, it helps so much. And I've always been, up till just recently, a couple of years ago, like, not a talker, wasn't into, I mean, I almost never talked on the phone. Like, I would text people, but I wasn't into having conversations with people. I hated the phone, you know, and I certainly wasn't doing Zoom. I mean, that's why I started a podcast, was just to get myself out of my comfort zone and start getting into these long form conversations. And so, but it helps so much just to sort of get that steam out of the teapot, so to speak.
Yep.
What are some of like the prejudices or the stereotypes about mental health or bipolar disorder that you would like to clear up, if there are any?
Yeah, I would say the biggest one is like, we're not crazy. I think I think there could be a big fear that if somebody has a mental health disorder, like you never know if they might pop or, you know, and I can honestly tell you those are such few and far between cases. More people than you know have a mental health diagnosis or some things that are going on. And so don't be afraid of it. And you don't have to fix it. You won't be able to fix it, but you can listen. So I think the biggest thing that if I could encourage people to do is when somebody maybe confides in you about an issue, or they say, yeah, I'm going through this thing, ask them about it. And if they're not open to talk about it, of course, you know, you want to be respectful, but just by you asking and being curious, like the simplest question of, well, what's that like for you? Just showing an openness that you don't know what they're going through, but that doesn't mean that you can't be there next to them while they go through it. And that's literally the definition of empathy. But it's not sympathy, like, oh, I'm sorry, because most of the time people with mental health disorders, like we don't want you to treat us like a baby, or like, oh, they're always like moody and, oh, what's it going to be this time? You know, treat us with like empathy, realizing that I have it different than you. And that's not a bad thing for either of us, but if you can sit by me or take a phone call from me and just realize that it's not like, oh, hey, you know, good to hear from you. Yeah, man, all right, talk to you later. But sitting there and letting there be some dead silence after you say, how are you really doing? You know, I think can be huge. Because it has been in my life, and I've noticed it on the flip side, because I now do that. I almost think of bipolar disorder as kind of like my superpower, because it taught me so much empathy. When I talk to people, and I've been in sales for many years as well, service and sales for many years. There's like this insane level of empathy that I feel when talking to someone. So I don't skip over little cues that maybe things aren't going that great. And you don't just say, oh, are you having a manic attack? You know, like you don't just hit them straight on the head with certain things, but you just listen. And, you know, when you're talking to somebody on the phone, you say things that might just key in the ability to have the conversation continue long enough for somebody to say something that they've been wanting to say, or, you know, you're just kind of laying a foundation for there to be more open communication. And yeah, it can be good, and it can be actually kind of hard sometimes too, because some people don't want to talk about it. And so you have to know your boundaries. I think boundaries are huge as well. Yeah. You know, knowing if you kind of throw the rock in the pond, or, you know, you throw out the line to chat, you kind of notice maybe something's happening and they're not open to it. You just got to be able to move on and still stay there with them in it, but not press the issue. So it's a delicate balance, I think. But biggest thing with empathy is just being able to be there for somebody, no matter the outcome, whether if they're in a good mood or a bad mood. You're just there to be there for them, whatever that might mean, even if it's just a phone call.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a big race coming up this year. I want to talk about that a little bit too.
For sure.
So I'm curious, like, obviously this is the biggest physical thing you've ever done. And there's a lot of runners listen to this. And so either people have been there or are there. So, and I'm interested in this portion of it as well, man. So like, I'm curious if you're just looking at Leadville as the next big goal, and I have to get this thing done, and I'm not looking beyond that? Or are you looking beyond that, like 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road? I want to do this race, or I want to expand here in my life, or this is what I want to do with my career, or how do you sort of map that out?
Yeah. So kind of the way that I do, because I'm a big like hobby person, and I love going after huge goals and achieving them. Coming out to Tennessee was probably my biggest achievement, of like moving my family 2,300 miles away. That I thought that would never happen.
Why did you choose Tennessee, by the way?
Oh, it's a good question. So I came out here to work for Dave Ramsey.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's handling finances is something I was never good at, but I started budgeting based on some stuff I learned from Dave. He's a financial, advice guy.
Got it.
And once I saw how it changed my life, I started teaching other people through a class he has called Financial Peace. Oh. And so once I started doing that and kind of getting a front row seat to seeing people turn their lives around and get out of debt and, all this, that, and the other, I was like, well, why don't we do this full time? And so I went to work for Dave. And the reason I consider it such an accomplishment is because the statistics are that you have a better chance of getting into Harvard than you do to work there. And it doesn't mean I'm super smart. It just means that I had a story that was relevant to the product that I would be working with. But it's just really hard to get an interview. They have like 14,000 applicants a year. And so I just felt very fortunate to get there and then nail the job. Long story short, during the pandemic, things changed there. And so I did end up leaving. Yeah, so that's how we got to Tennessee.
Okay.
But in regard to choosing this, I kind of decide on a goal, and then I live in that goal. Mm-hmm. Okay, what would it look like? What would need to be true for this to happen? And then I dial my way towards it. It's kind of like beginning with the end in mind, right? So I kind of was just flirting with the idea each little race I joined up to, and as I started training. Then once I made the jump to actually signing up for Leadville, I feel like we're just getting started. I mean, of course I already have who wouldn't love to run Western States or Moab 240 or anything in Moab, even a shorter distance race. I mean, Cruel Jewel is just around the corner, coming up here pretty soon. Yep. There's so many races and so many places to see. So I really feel like I'm just getting started with this. I definitely, I chose a big one, like this is a big race, but no matter the outcome, I have a deep desire to run for the rest of my life, not just train for kind of like, and nothing wrong with doing a marathon and where you train for a certain amount of time, you run the marathon, and then lots of people will do that, an accomplishment, and then they might run or might not. Mm-hmm. I want to continue to push the envelope and see how far I can go and where it'll take me.
For sure. Yeah. Have you heard of people talking about the post-race blues?
So no, but I can tell you that I feel like the bigger the race that I've done, the longer I've felt like I think what you're talking about.
Right. And, people like myself and yourself who kind of struggle with mental health, I think probably feel it a little bit more. I don't know that there's any science behind that, but yeah, I felt that a lot of times. I'm working towards this goal. I'm working, and my whole life is almost consumed by this thing. I remember at one time I was training for an Ironman and my garbage disposal broke, and I was like, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm not going to fix it till after the race. It's like I couldn't even be bothered, right? Like everything was going into this Ironman. But then, after you finish the goal, you celebrate, you have a good day or two, and then things just start to drop off. And it's like, now what? Like, do I just have to sign up for another race, or like, who am I? Like, is this who I am now? Or, was this just a fluke? Or all these weird feelings go through your head. So, and I'm not saying that's going to happen to you, but I didn't know if you'd heard of that. And I would just say, be cognizant of it and sort of have that mapped out ahead of time and maybe plan on it. I don't even know what the right answer, what the right advice would be to give to you for something like that. But yeah, people talk about it, and it's a real thing. So
yeah, I was thinking about putting something on the calendar in like November, because there's a local race that I might want to revisit. I was like, let's not put anything on the calendar until we see what this race goes like. You know, I don't want to overcommit myself. So that's kind of where I'm at. But
yeah, and for sure, you know, give yourself some time off afterwards. You're going to want to do some rest and recovery, but it's then that mental thing comes in. It's like, all right, like, who am I? It's weird.
Well, totally. I could totally see that happening, because I kind of think of it like training for something like this. You know, I'm thinking about it all day, every day. I mean, I work at a running store, so half of the conversations I have are about what I'm training for.
Yeah.
And so, and then it's one day. Well, it's actually more than 4 hours, but you know, get what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of like your wedding day. You plan, you've got invitations, you plan all this for just a couple of hours, and then it's done. Right. So so I definitely, I'm going to rely on you for those pick me up calls.
For sure.
Might have your number.
I got your back.
You
Absolutely.
day after day.
Got your back. No worries. No worries at all. Yeah. Do you have any other races that are like dream races for you? You mentioned Western States and Cruel Jewel. Anything else that's crazy, or like, what are your thoughts there? I know you bought a bike recently. You've been getting into a little biking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I'd never, until I started mountain biking and realizing how awesome that is. Like, I've always been a mountain biker, but just getting back into it recently, I was like, Leadman has a nice ring to it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Hell yeah. So, I love it. I love it.
I've definitely thought about that. I think honestly, I think it'd be cool to do the Triple Crown. I mean, like, I think that would be like a lifetime achievement goal, you know, work my way, of course, doing like a 200 miler at first, but then going for something really big like that. I would love to do UTMB. That's one of my huge goals. I mean, again, it's kind of like, what makes a guy think that he can run a race like that? But just something deep down within him that he can't explain. So that's kind of how I feel about Leadville. But then I was like, wait a minute, Leadville's a qualifier for UTMB. So if I got one other qualifier, I'd at least be able to enter into the lottery. And again, these goals and these dreams are so far out. And I'm truly relying on the faith that I can only do what I can do. That if I'm meant to be to toe that line, the things are going to line up for me to get there.
Yeah.
And so, but I also need people to help me guide my goals and decide what's best. And so I would say those are some big ones. I think the idea of the Moab 240 just sounds insane. I think that sounds awesome. If I could get to a place where I was even invited, I think Badwater sounds insane. I think that would be awesome to train for, just like wearing a sweatsuit every day, like 10 layers, and, you know, just training for that crazy heat. And then I think I want to do like the Barkley Fall Classic. I think because I'm fascinated by the Barkley Marathons, but
it's your neck of the woods.
It's my neck of the woods, man. It's right around the corner, President State Park. So, I've had a lot of people say that they've done that race, and that's one race. Like, I don't think, I can't even conceive in my mind of like entering Barkley, and I shouldn't. I'm like way too novice of a runner to even be considered. But I do it. There's something like honestly weirdly romantic about that race, just as hard as it sounds. I mean, I know that's a pretty common feeling in the runner, like ultra runner realm, but man, that just seems to me like the pinnacle of suffering.
If it's calling your name, man, answer that call. I mean, it sounds like that's how Leadville is for you. It was just kind of calling your name, and it's just something you had to do, man. So like follow those passions, follow the dreams. I want to ask you one more hard question pertaining to
Yeah.
Leadville. And so like, I'm going to ask you this question, and then after you answer it, I want you to just put it out of your head completely, because as a coach, this is probably like not the question I should be asking you, but from a mental health perspective, maybe it's, I don't know. I want to ask you, say something horrible happens and you don't finish Leadville this year. You twist an ankle, something horrible happens. Have you thought about what that looks like for you? And partly like your mental health, and how do you pick the pieces up and continue on after that?
Yeah, I have thought about that. And actually, it's funny you should say that. Like when I started telling people about Leadville, and they were like, well, "How are you going to get?" They were like, kind of, "How are you going to get there?" Or, "Do you think you can run that far?" And I was kind of thinking to myself, like, I could roll my ankle on the starting line. Like
Totally.
any of those can happen, So I've definitely prepared myself for as much as you can, for if something like that was to happen. And the reality in my head is that in 365 days, Leadville is going to happen again. And if I don't, if some freak accident happens and I don't finish the race, I will stab at it again. I will get up and do everything I can. I mean, some of my biggest inspirations are people that either have physical limiting disabilities or mental limiting disabilities. And so no matter what comes across, I'm going to figure out a way to still push past my own mental limitations, even if it has to look different physically, I guess is the way that I would put it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Now get it out of your head, because it's not happening. I mean, really, it's just, it's a blessing to even show up to the starting line healthy at something like this, because all the training and the volume that we're doing as we're preparing for this, just showing up to the starting line is a blessing. It's like, I'm lucky. Like so many people wouldn't be able to do this, couldn't be able to do this. Just showing up to the starting line is something to be thankful for. So, and this is a stupid arbitrary sport anyways, I mean, let's admit it. I mean, sure, running is cool. Ultra running is cool. I love it. I've been a part of the sport for a long time, but the whole thing's pointless, right? I mean, you get a belt buckle. That's it.
The first place guy gets the same prize as the last place guy.
Totally.
Y'all get a belt buckle.
Yeah.
Except for Leadville, you get the big buckle. So,
yeah. But come on. Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Let's get you to the finish line of this stupid sport this year, and then start looking at stupid races we'll do next year. And just keep on doing this thing, man. I mean, the thing that I like about you, Collin, is you strike me as someone who's not running from something, but running to something. Does that resonate? Does that make sense with you?
Yeah. And I mean, it feels really great to hear,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I talk to a lot of people on this podcast, and, all good people, but I talk to a lot of people that have mental health issues, and they're running from something, or running from something in their past, or some trauma or phobia or something. And they're like running to escape almost. And I don't sense that from you.
Yeah. I think you're right. I don't know that I ever would have put it into those words, but I do hear people talking about that idea. And I think that's one of the things that makes me feel most free about running, is that I'm knowingly putting myself in an adverse situation for the pure sake of that adverse situation. It makes it harder too, because I know that at any time I can just stop. There's no one forcing me to do any of this, but it's that there's just an internal drive that is just so deeply rooted within me to succeed to whatever degree that is. And you kind of hit on it, man. Like it's kind of a thankless sport, and I like it that way. I think we as people are just vain creatures. We like to be noticed. But the lack of notoriety that comes with ultra running, and especially middle of the pack, there's so many of us, it's really good for my ego. I really like I really like that feeling of like kind of like being sucked into the crowd and like unnoticed, you know, because really at that point, you're the one that gets your struggles and gets your victory, whatever that might be like. And so that's kind of like my driving factor. And to show these kids that are sleeping in the wall over that, you know, they can do great things too, no matter what. So
totally
amazing how kids will do that to you.
Absolutely. 100%, man. Well, I can't wait for the summer, man. I'm personally going to be pacing you into that finish line. So we got a bunch of pacers and a bunch of runners that we're going to be working with out there. And I'm going to be dragging your butt into that finish line. And it's not, you're probably going to hate me by, you know, about 10 miles in, and then you're going to love me, and then you're going to hate me, and then you're going to love me. And you're going to feel it all. You're going to feel, you know, a whole lifetime's worth of emotions packed into 24 to 30 hours. And it's going to be epic, man. And I can't wait to be there for it. So,
man, it's exciting. Cool. Exciting. I think about it. I think about it every day. I got
nice.
my map, my Leadville map right there.
I recognize that map. I know that map really well. I got the Leadville poster behind me too. So,
oh, that's cool.
Yes,
I like that.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, this is a great conversation, man. I really appreciate you just being honest.
Absolutely.
I mean, so many people just are sort of ashamed, I guess, of their mental health. And it's something that I'm still working through. You know, it's something that I haven't been super open and honest about, but I'm getting there. And, you know, listening to you just be totally open and candid about it is inspiring for me. And I appreciate it, man. It's a great conversation. Yeah. I think it's going to help some people too.
Dude, thank you so much for being willing to, you know, have me on. I'm honored to be on the show with you and have the opportunity to talk about something that's so, you know, important to me. So
honors all mine. Honors all mine, man. So just keep doing what you're doing, and let's get you into that finish line.
Heck yeah.
Cool, buddy. Thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Catch you later.
All right, later.